Our studies so far have concerned what I believe is a distortion to faith, in that it overturns the dietary authority, the church does, of Yahweh our Elohim in establishing guidelines for us, just as the Roman Catholic Church has overthrown the faith of many by claiming to have the authority to remove the Sabbath day and institute Sunday as a so-called holy day. But nevertheless, our studies are now concerning doctrines of demons. Another scripture that some point to say that Yahweh has changed his mind on his commandment not to eat unclean foods is found in the book of Timothy, 1 Timothy 4 through 13. It's a favorite scripture of mine from my youth, and first alerted me to watch out for stuff. Now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith. Doesn't mean just faith, but from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of demons or devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from meats which Elohim hath created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. Now, up to this point, we have not been able to come up with a single solitary scripture which advocates the eating of unclean animals for those who are already pork eaters. It would be fairly easy to look at this scripture from their own perspective and assume that Paul is calling those who only believe in eating clean animals as those who follow doctrines of devils or demons, and having their conscience seared with a hot iron. But my friend, demons aren't the ones who came up with the idea of only eating clean animals. It has Yahweh's fingerprints all over it. He commanded that, not man. The scripture actually says that some will be commanding to abstain from foods which Elohim created to be received with thanksgiving by those who know and believe the truth. Giving up meat for 40 days of Lent is one example, a doctrine of demons, and stems from the pagan practice that Yahweh condemns in Ezekiel 8, along with the image of jealousy, which is the phallic steeple. Now it makes me wonder if that's why people cross their hands like this to make a steeple. I'd never thought of that before. Images of creeping things and abominable images on the wall, like those found in the sheet, I suppose. And, of course, sun worship, all vestiges of Catholicism and to some extent Protestantism today, or Protestants. That's my background. Those who believe and know the truth are those who understand that Elohim created certain animals, such as sheep and cattle, to be received with thanksgiving. Those who believe and know the truth will understand that pork and shellfish aren't even supposed to be considered food to begin with, and never was intended to be food. With this in mind, let's read the following verse. For every creature of Elohim, in other words, everyone that he has put his stamp of approval on, is good, and nothing to be refused if it is received with thanksgiving. For it is set apart by the word of Elohim. Now that's another mark of distinction, is what we're about to eat set apart by the word of Elohim. Does it fit within the range of Leviticus chapter 11? For the scripture says we're to be governed by the word of truth. Set apart by the word of Elohim and prayer. After reading the above verses, some have mistakenly thought that as long as they pray over the food before they eat the unclean animal, somehow Yahweh mysteriously, magically cleanses it for them. But this is not what is meant. Suppose such a person forgot to pray one time before they had their breakfast sausage. And I know that's probably happened to me. They would be guilty of committing an abomination if it really meant every creature is good to eat. Then we can have buzzards, bats, lizards, rats, and skunks for breakfast too. Yuck. Mercy. Somehow the logic of the apostate church doesn't fly. It's inconsistent. So what is meant by these words? If we examine them closely, we find the actual meaning of what's being said here. There are three classifications, categories of what is being said in the scripture. 1, every creature of Elohim is good, nothing to be refused. 2, if it is received with thanksgiving. 3, by those who believe and know the truth. The creature is set apart by the word of Elohim and prayer. That closely fits in with 3. So first of all, verse 5 speaks of every creature of Elohim. Could there be a creature which is of Elohim and another creature which is not of Elohim? We do know that there are some men which we would consider to be men of Elohim. I pray to be one. And others which are not. Consider 2 Peter 1:21. For the prophecy never came by the will of man, but dedicated men of Elohim spoke as they were moved by the dedicated Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh. Many men who are of Elohim are dedicated men, while men who are not of Elohim are undedicated. Can we not say the same of all of Yahweh's living creatures? Though he created all men, some men and all creatures, some are of Elohim and others are not. Well, what do I mean by this? This is true of animals. Well, creatures that are of Elohim are designated to be on our table. They meet the litmus test that Yahweh makes. He's the creator. They're capable of being set apart and dedicated. Creatures which are not are animals which are not able to be set apart for this purpose because they are not clean. They're not fit for human consumption. In other words, being clean and being dedicated are intricately linked throughout scriptures. Consider Leviticus 10:9-11. Do not drink wine or intoxicating drink. You know your sons with you when you go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. And you can imagine that some people tried it and were killed. That you may distinguish between dedicated and undedicated, between clean and unclean. And that they teach the children of Yisrael all the statutes which Yahweh has spoken by the hand of Moses. In Ezekiel 22:26, her priests have violated my laws and profaned my dedicated things. They have not distinguished between dedicated and undedicated, nor have they made known the difference between clean and unclean. They have hidden their eyes from my Sabbaths so that I am profaned among them. 1 Corinthians 7:14, for the unbelieving husband is set apart by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is set apart by the husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean. But now they are dedicated. Leviticus 11:44, for I am Yahweh your Elohim, you shall therefore consecrate yourselves. You shall be dedicated, for I am dedicated. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So separation and set-apartness are intricately linked with cleanness. Intricately. Becoming undedicated is intricately linked with being defiled. Typically, the animals not dedicated and thus not of Elohim are scavengers and garbage collectors of the earth because they have their job. That's their job. Their job is not to serve on our kitchen table. The second characteristic states, nothing to be refused, received with thanksgiving. The previous verse said, foods Elohim created to be received with thanksgiving, and those who believe and know the truth. Therefore, in context, it's obvious that those receiving it with thanksgiving are those who believe and know the truth. Those who believe and know the truth are going to know the difference between these creatures, which ones we should eat and which ones we should not. Which ones are set apart as food, which ones are not. They will not fall prey to doctrines, words of demons, or customs of culture. Why? Because the word of Elohim tells us the truth. His word is truth. Those that know his word know his truth. In verse 2, those who believe and know the truth will know which creatures are set apart, a word meaning set apart by the word of Elohim. Let's remember that when Paul wrote Timothy, there was no New Testament. Okay? The dedicated scriptures in the Old Testament were the words of Elohim he would be referring to. Leviticus 11 speaks specifically about which animals Yahweh have dedicated and which ones are appointed abominable, and when animals are set apart for dedicated use. The unclean animals are not set apart in the word of Yahweh. The word set apart means set apart. Yahweh set apart which animals are clean and which animals are unclean.